In terms of what ANCAP's doing, it's trying to encourage better performance by vehicle manufacturers, and it offers this star rating system as the carrot, as it were. Some of these systems are about providing information and awareness that you as a driver can't see. So these systems have been around for quite a while now, but many of them have become, I guess, part and parcel of the driving experience. Now we're getting to the point where the car's able to monitor whether or not the driver's paying attention. So I think these technologies, from ANCAP's perspective, where technologies exist that are demonstrably going to improve the safety outcomes, they are ones that we want to see adopted and brought forward.
Let's talk for a moment about the role of ANCAP.
Yeah, so ANCAP's role is an interesting one.
Active driver assist systems, or ADAS, are transforming the way we drive, with technologies like blind spot monitoring, lane keep assist, and automatic emergency braking designed to make our roads safer and save lives. But as these systems become more common, many drivers are reporting frustration with the constant warnings, intrusive alerts, and unexpected interventions behind the wheel. Today, we're exploring where the line sits between safety and distraction, how consumer feedback is reshaping ANCAP safety assessments, and what the next generation of smarter, more intuitive driver assistance technology could look like. Joining us to unpack it all is Carla Hoorweg, CEO of ANCAP. Carla, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Ruth. It's really good to be here.
Tell me a little about what active driver assist systems are. We're going to call them ADAS, but tell us what those kind of entail.
So these systems have been around for quite a while now, but many of them have become, I guess, part and parcel of the driving experience. So you might not recognise them, or you might not even know about them. So these are systems that are essentially technology-based. They're using some kind of sensor, whether it's potentially a radar, a LiDAR, or a camera, to identify a potential hazard or a situation and then intervene to assist the driver. So some of the technologies that we've seen around for quite a while include ABS, or anti-lock braking systems, and also electronic stability control, or ESC. And those technologies are ones that were around for quite a while, and then they became part of the regulation. So any car that you're buying today would automatically have those in there, and you probably don't know that they're there, but they're activating in certain situations to help keep the car on the road or to keep it stable.
Those kinds of systems, because we're perhaps familiar with them, I think they're a decade or more that they've been in place, do they become part of the driving experience seamlessly?
So for some of these technologies, they absolutely have. I think for anyone who's a little bit older, they might remember anti-lock braking systems coming in and the transition from a car that had it to a car that didn't have it to one that did have it, and a bit of pushback. I think with any technology, there is always a little bit of a learning curve for people who are driving, because you learn to drive generally on a car that's got less safety features or less features, and over time more and more things come in. That's just the natural evolution. But I think many of these older technologies have become seamless, and I think some of the earlier technologies that we've seen sort of in recent years, like autonomous emergency braking, that when we're thinking about the new generation of active safety systems, that one is one of the probably, older of that group. But autonomous emergency braking is something that's been around for, 15 years or so now. Many vehicles have it across a range of different scenarios. And that's one where, you're now used to the car potentially putting on the brakes in a variety of different situations, particularly for anyone who's got a car that's sensitive when there's, pedestrians walking past you when you're reversing, or when you're going slowly and there's another car maybe crossing your path. So I think these technologies, from ANCAP's perspective, where technologies exist that are demonstrably going to improve the safety outcomes, they are ones that we want to see adopted and brought forward. but the delivery of those still needs to be in the model that they are, which is a driver assistance system. So they should be there helping the driver and intervening in situations where the driver is either not capable, not able to, or there's something unexpected that's happened, and maybe the timing of that intervention that's needed means that a system's going to give you a better outcome than a driver response and their own response times. So now we're getting to the point where the car is able to monitor whether or not the driver's paying attention. So we see these driver monitoring systems in play. And what we're looking for now is, can the car respond? So if the car can identify that the driver is paying attention, can it change how it deploys some of these interventions? So if it knows you're paying attention, it doesn't need to intervene as much. If it can see that you're not paying attention, it can be on a higher level of alert to intervene more quickly because it knows the driver's not paying full attention. So it's seeing a really sophisticated evolution of these technologies. But I think it's also important for people to recognise that they, in many cases, they are new. So we do see these technologies come on board. They may not perform the way you're expecting them to perform as a driver if you've never used one before. They might perform slightly differently between different manufacturers, and they also might perform or be given different names. So it can be a little bit confusing for consumers to really understand which system is which.
It can feel a little intrusive. I was admiring the Swan River the other day in a lovely late autumn day, and it told me off for not looking at the road. And I think that's something that you don't expect your car to get involved perhaps as much in your driving if you're new to these systems. Is it something that it takes some time? Do we need to be training people to be better equipped to understand how these systems will impact the driving experience?
There's definitely a role for more education and for consumers to understand what these systems are supposed to do. And I think, the other element of that is, what are they not supposed to do, so that you have a good grapple on, is this behaving the way it should be behaving or not really? So it is a little bit of a shift for the driving experience. So sophisticated technologies are now going to do things that you're not necessarily used to. So there's definitely a learning curve for drivers. I think it is something that, it's not just ANCAP encouraging these systems. They're being designed by manufacturers and driven by manufacturers themselves. So there's also a role, I think, for, driver trainers and others in that, and that sort of driving pipeline. The dealerships, absolutely, that when you pick up your new car, the dealerships, we believe, have a really important role to play in showing drivers how these systems work. What does it do? What does that button mean? What does that light mean? So I think these are the, there's some challenges around how we do that, but it's a really important part of consumers coming to understand how these systems work and to accept them, which is what we want. And I think driver monitoring is a really crucial one to focus on, because we know distraction is such an important part of fatalities and serious injuries on Australian roads. That's well evidenced, and I think there's also a bit of an attitudinal shift around the fact that you do need to be in control of the vehicle. And that's a real challenge, because we've got systems that are now helping you. So it's actually pushing drivers in a way to not pay attention. So there's this balance that we have to try and meet there.
There's really been an explosion in the number of technological interventions that can be in a car. I think Austroads lists about 50 of different systems, and some of those may be fairly familiar. So perhaps an indicator that shows that there's somebody coming up in your blind spot, but then also a lane assistance movement that some cars will actually then bring you back into the lane if they think that you're too close to the traffic or on either side, or perhaps you haven't indicated and you're merging, and it'll try and readjust you there. So there's a different spectrum, I suppose, of how much a car will want to intervene in different circumstances.
That's right. Some of these systems are about providing information and awareness that you as a driver can't see. So blind spot monitoring is a really good example of something where the car's using cameras or sensors in in an angle that you can't see as the driver. It's in your blind spot. So that's going to give you information. Usually it's through the little orange light on your side mirror that is going to tell you that there's something there. What we see now is, I guess, advancements on how sophisticated that can be. So blind spot information systems now with a brand new car should be noticing that there's a vehicle in the lane next to you in your blind spot and stopping you from crossing into that lane. Now that depends on a number of factors, but generally speaking, that's there to intervene when a car can see that there's something that you haven't identified and to help avoid an incident. I think these technologies are proliferating in a way that may seem unwieldy if you're not in the car industry and you're just buying a car every 7 to 10 years, or the average that the people are purchasing a new car is somewhere in that range. So you're dipping in and out of a market that's advancing really quickly in that intervening period. And it seems like really, really huge changes. And they are. I think where we see this and where part of ANCAP's role sits is that when we look at autonomous vehicles, really all of these components that we're seeing come through are the elements that form an autonomous vehicle. At the end, when you have a fully autonomous vehicle, all of these components are there. They're heavily sophisticated and they all need to work together to control the car. So what we're seeing at the moment now is as single elements come into the market and are viable and reliable, they get built upon with these other sophisticated extensions. So, I think when we look at autonomous emergency braking, initially when that came into the market, that was just about your car and can it see another car and can it apply the brakes in an emergency situation if you as the driver don't. Since that first came in, it's expanded. So the range of speeds that system can work at now is huge. It's, from sort of 5 kilometres an hour up to 100 k's an hour. But also the car can detect not only a car right in front of it that's moving at an offset speed, or a car that's turning across in front of your vehicle, turning across its path. So the range of scenarios is broader, but also now the kinds of hazards that the vehicle can see has expanded. So now cars can see pedestrians, they can see cyclists, they can see motorcyclists. And again, in a range of situations, what we're looking at is the situations including things like daytime, nighttime. And from this year, is it raining? Is there mist or something that's going to make the conditions not optimal for the car to see that hazard? So those technologies advance. And I think that's the important point to remember, that some of these technologies are really new. So there are things that we're seeing in their application that aren't unfolding the way that consumers find useful or find helpful, and that's part of the role that ANCAP's now looking to play.
Let's talk for a moment about the role of ANCAP. So many people will think of you solely as the people that do the crash test dummies, but your role is quite an interesting one. Could you explain what the organisation does and how it works and how it can influence the way that cars are designed and manufactured?
Yeah, so ANCAP's role is an interesting one. It is not mandatory to have an ANCAP star rating, which I think is something that surprises a lot of people. The reason for that is we're trying to set a high bar for manufacturers. The idea with the regulations, the minimum legal requirements to bring a car into the country, they set the low bar and they have to be met for you to sell a car into the country as a manufacturer. But in terms of what ANCAP's doing, it's trying to encourage better performance by vehicle manufacturers, and it offers this star rating system as the carrot, as it were. So if manufacturers do well, we'll obviously market those ratings, we'll sing their praises, and we'll inform and advise consumers what the benefits of buying a safer car are. And obviously there are many benefits. But when we look at the other end of the spectrum, ANCAP also has a little bit of its own funding. We are a small not-for-profit, but we do have money that we utilise to go and assess vehicles that manufacturers have not brought to us for testing. test process is independent. So whether or not a manufacturer brings in their car or whether we go and select one to test unilaterally, that process is done in a very scientific way to publicly disclosed protocols so that anyone can go and look and see how that car was assessed and tested, and also the manufacturer can understand what they're going to be up against when they go through the process. So that means that we can provide information to the market and to consumers and sometimes to the regulators about vehicles that are really not meeting the safety expectations of the community. And certainly in the Australian market, customers have a really high expectation of safety. Customers expect 5-star safety ratings, and they expect cars to be really safe. So where cars fall short of that, we're able to come in and say, look, this is what we found, and then it's over to the manufacturer to work out where to from there. I think the other role that we play that's becoming more and more important as we see these new technologies come into the market is about providing guardrails for manufacturers. We have been an instigator of encouraging some of these technologies onto market where we know there is a really clear safety benefit for having them in your car. But the implementation of those features hasn't always been done in a way where we think customers have been considered. Customers really should be at the forefront. The driver should be considered. These systems should be assisting the driver, not annoying them. And I think we've seen a number of examples over the last couple of years where there's room for improvement. And so ANCAP's role now is about providing guardrails to say to manufacturers, this is what we want to see, this is what good looks like. And as we move forward, if you want to do well in our program, you have to kind of move in these directions. Otherwise, we'll be coming in and providing information to the market so that they understand what the trade-offs are.
Well, you've just recently looked at the way that you do some of those safety assessments and how you actually might judge a car. And it's not just then what happens at the moment of crash, but there's a number of things that you're now assessing earlier on, before you even have that issue arise on the roads. Can you talk me through the new pillars?
Yeah, that's right. So we have changed the way we're assessing. All of the things that we've been looking at before are still in play. So it's more a reorganisation of how we're working through our process. We've always had 4 pillars of assessment. And the reason for having 4 pillars is we want balanced assessment. We want balanced performance, good performance across all of the different areas that we look at. And where we've moved to now is those pillars of assessment follow the phases of a crash. So they better, I guess, provide for the different technologies that we're seeing come on board and the different potential improvements that we can see in terms of road safety outcomes. So when we look at the phases of a crash, the first one is what we call safe driving. This is where nothing's happening. So you are driving along, there's no imminent threat, and this is looking at systems that are there to assist the driver. And this is about taking some of the cognitive load off the driver in terms of the driving task. And then other useful information such as potential hazards that might be coming up is a good example. So, is there something happening further down the road that you should know about and be aware of now as a driver, but also other systems that can help you, such as blind spot information is a good example of one where it's informing and helping the driver. Then we move through to crash avoidance, and this is where in this second pillar we're looking at these systems that can actually intervene when there's an imminent threat, and the idea is that ideally the car can intervene and avoid the crash in the first place, because that is a much better outcome than having a crash. These first 2 pillars are really where we're seeing a lot of these new technologies play out. So particularly the ADAS systems and driver assistance, driver monitoring systems. The third pillar is what everyone knows us for, that's crash protection. So there is absolutely no change there in terms of the assessments that we're doing. We've added some additional pieces into that pillar. We've wrapped up all of the crash protection elements. So it's not just what happens in a crash for the people inside the vehicle, but it's what happens to counterparty vehicles, what happens if a pedestrian or cyclist is actually impacted by your vehicle. So all of those crash protection elements are rolled in together. And also there is now additional virtual or simulation data being requested of manufacturers so that we can understand that crash protection matrix for a broader range of occupants, so different sizes.
Children, old people, vulnerable people. So it's not just you sort of your standard adult person.
Yeah, so we've always assessed crash protection with both adult and child occupants in the car, and a range of different ages for the children. So some are in that sort of teenage, size dummy that is not in a booster cushion or a child seat, and then others are in the appropriate child restraint, so the sort of younger age dummies. So they're all designed to represent a range of different child or small adult size people in the car, in the relevant child restraints where they should be in one. And then also what we're looking at is a wider range of dummies in that. So we've got the 5th percentile female dummy, which is a small adult female dummy. That dummy has been in use for since around 2018 now, and that is being positioned in a range of different seating positions so that we're getting more information about how that dummy is responding. So for 5th percentile female means that 95% of the female population is larger than that dummy, so it's quite small. But that is an area that's growing, and there are more female dummies being developed, and we're hoping to use more of the female dummies as they come into certification, which is what we need to be able to use them. So there's, I think, a growing range of assessment going on there, but also simulation data. So we have our crash test dummies in the cars that we crash, but then manufacturers are requested to provide additional information about their own predictions of what would happen with a different set of dummies or different larger and older occupants as well. So the 4th pillar is around post-crash, and this is really the newer element of what we're assessing, in the sense that it will be something that people may not have realised we were looking at until now. So this is all about what happens after a crash. And as we know, there's a concept called the golden hour, which means that essentially the quicker people can receive medical attention, the more likely they are to survive and the less injuries they will likely suffer. So if people can receive expert medical attention within an hour of a serious crash, we know they're much more likely to survive. So the key technologies that we're focused on there are eCall or emergency call, which is where the car can notify emergency services that it's had a crash, and it can provide information. So that's happening through a third-party call centre that's going to triage those calls. But crucial, especially if occupants are not conscious and unable to call themselves. And then the other big component is around rescue. So this is where we're looking at the ability of first responders to actually access the vehicle and get inside. That is something that covers a range of different elements that I think people will be interested in, everything from sort of, the shape of door handles and flush door handles to how long electric doors and windows can be operable after a crash or after submergence in water. And also these rescue cards that we've been providing since 2020, where the manufacturer lays out in an ISO compliant schematic all of the places where emergency services should or shouldn't cut. So really crucial for when you've got the fireys using the jaws of life on an EV, understanding where the high voltage battery lines run, how to disconnect, also where airbag inflators and other hazards are, so that the first responders stay safe, but also they're extricating people as quickly as they can. Those pillars, I guess, are a very big step forward in terms of how we're looking at safety, but the star ratings remain the same. So it's still a 5-star safety rating with a date stamp indicating which year the vehicle was tested.
Some of the issues that you've touched on are of concern to drivers. So, for example, that idea of a flush door handle may look amazing, but if you cannot access it because there's an outage or the car's immersed in water, then obviously it becomes a very big safety hazard, hence why you're looking at it in terms of your safety pillars. How are you compelling or encouraging manufacturers to really think about those things which are perhaps crucial tools on the road that you don't want to be working through a menu to try and track down, or you don't need to have to pull out a manual to be able to open?
Yeah, that's another area where we've taken some pretty significant steps in this round of protocol changes to really encourage manufacturers to consider how these systems are used by a driver. So we call it in technical land human-machine interface. I think usability of the systems, or how friendly they are, how much they help the driver or distract the driver, is really what we're getting at here. So there is a focus on ensuring that core safety functions are accessible through a button, ideally. We're conscious that some manufacturers have opted for these really streamlined designs where all they have is a touch screen. So in those instances, those core safety features need to be accessible at all times on the touch screen rather than being buried in menus. I know there are a lot of other elements that people are concerned about, like changing the radio station or the inputs, and also climate control and air conditioning. We're just starting with the core safety functions at the moment. So that is things like the indicator, the hazard lights, the horn, the lights. So they're functions that we need to be easily accessed by the driver quickly. So essentially the way all of our programs work is that to achieve a certain star rating, you need to achieve a certain level of points. So really it's kind of a recognition and reward system, whereas if you do well, you get points. So if in some cases it's if you don't do these things, you will get. If you implement a system and you don't do these things, you will get points. If you implement the system and you do these things, you will get more points. If your performance is not good, then you won't get any points, or you might get a small number of points. And the points that are scored across each of those different pillars have thresholds that need to be met for you to hit 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, etc. So the idea is we want that good safety performance across all of the pillars, and we want to encourage certain behaviours and systems in cars and discourage others.
I think there'd be general agreement that everyone should be able to open the door of their car if they needed to in an emergency. So I don't think that's too controversial. But there are some of these ADAS that are actually quite divisive, that people have very strong opinions about, even if they are there to protect them on the road. So the emergency braking is one of those. Some people say that there are too many false positives, that your car might suddenly, brake because there's a branch that waves across the road, or somebody standing on the edge of the curb and is obviously not entering, but the car anticipates and slows you or stops you in traffic to do so. You have done some of this feedback work to really talk to drivers about their experiences. How have you found people's perceptions in this area?
So perceptions range, and I think that's to be expected when we've got new technologies coming on board, and every manufacturer is implementing them slightly differently. These are not necessarily subject to regulation, and where there are regulations, it's about the performance, not actually how you implement the system. And I think that's one of the things that ANCAP's been really responsive to. So we've taken on board the feedback from consumers, and we do receive consumer inquiries all the time. We do look at those, and we have been compiling them and going, well, what are people really concerned about? We've analysed that, and over the last couple of years, we've been rolling out a particular piece of research on lane support systems, which is really honed in on the concerns that people have about how cars are behaving when they intervene. And that has ranged from, people being really concerned about how difficult it is to control the car if you don't want it to intervene. And also, I guess, the amount of force that you need to use to control the car. So this is something that we were actually able to quantify. So our team has done a fair bit of detailed work to look at how do we've got all this data, we've taken these cars out on the test track, they're fully kitted out with all of these sensors and we know exactly what they're doing. So can we quantify this in a way that's actually going to be meaningful for manufacturers so that they can take on board the feedback into their R&D process and change something? So some of those changes have actually been onboarded into our protocols since 2025. And what they focus on are around ensuring that if the driver is making a decision or providing some input into the car, that the car recognizes that and yields. So these systems are supposed to assist the driver, not take over the driving task. And I think some of them have not been implemented as well as we would like. But the benefit of our program is that we can change what we're doing and we can refocus manufacturers in the direction we want them to go. So I think lane support systems are one. I think autonomous emergency braking is another area that I know consumers have concern in regard to. I think with autonomous emergency braking, there are a number of, I guess, phases that occur during a potential crash. And sometimes it may not be autonomous emergency braking kicking in. It may be the forward collision warning and the forward collision warning alerts that happen before AEB kicks in. When AEB kicks in, you know, because you pull up in about a metre and you won't know what's happened, but you have stopped, the car has stopped, and it's a very, I would say, intense experience, but it's done in a way where, you know, as a driver, you it brakes much more effectively than you hitting the brakes because all of the car's systems are working together. So it's actually not a necessarily a rough experience. It's something that we hope drivers don't experience. But I think some of this is about learning what's actually going on in the car. Sometimes the forward collision warning can be very sensitive. And this is where we see those situations where the car's identified that there's a pedestrian on the side of the road or the car thinks it's too close to the car in front. So this is good driver information to say that, you know, maybe slow down a bit and back off a bit to give more space. But on the other side, where a car is behaving in a way where you really don't fundamentally think it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, we encourage people to contact the manufacturer. There are examples where cars need to be recalibrated. There are examples where cars are not behaving appropriately and the manufacturer can actually do something about it. And that's one of the roles that ANCAP's been playing, where we're taking the consumer feedback that comes to us and going to the manufacturers and saying, we're having consumers concerned about these particular scenarios. We think your system needs to be improved. And in many cases, they take that away, they analyse what they can do to their algorithm that's driving those systems, and then when you go to the dealership and get your service done, the systems are upgraded through a flash update. Some are updated over the air. So there are mechanisms that manufacturers can take to improve these systems, and I think that's where we're at the moment, that we're trying to encourage manufacturers with systems already deployed to take on board the consumer feedback and look at what they can do to improve them. And for cars coming into the market that are new, we're setting the guardrails about how we want that performance to look and how we want the consumer experience to be.
So if you've got a car that's throwing on the brakes every time you're in traffic, you constantly feel in fear of being rear-ended, or it is you're having to wrestle it to change a lane, that's not something you should necessarily put up with. You can have a conversation with the manufacturer. You can check if that car calibration is correct.
Absolutely. Yeah, and feed that back to the manufacturer, because I think what we've seen is that some manufacturers haven't invested as heavily as others in tuning these vehicles for the Australian road conditions. And that's certainly been one of the other scenarios that we've seen, that where you're on maybe a sort of regional road or a sub-highway, that vehicles are not responding well to the lane markings. They're not putting you in the lane in the place that you want to be. In some instances, that's highway driving as well. And so these are the kinds of scenarios that we're really encouraging consumers to provide that feedback to manufacturers. It really is a small number of of vehicles and manufacturers where we're seeing this, but we have seen a number of them respond, and that's how we can help.
The types of systems that we're talking about, some of them can monitor the driver, so they can look at the driver's eye tracking. They can see how much attention the driver's providing. Some of them are alerts and providing information. Some of them are interventioning. So tell me, how do we have a mix of these systems within a car that you might pick up off the lot?
Yeah, so I think, when we look at some of those systems, we've got things like, we talked about some of them before, blind spot information system or blind spot monitoring. That's now moved into more sophisticated lane support systems. They're centering you in the lane, or in some cases, they're helping the driver to change lanes. The elements that ANCAP's been really focused on up until this point have been the emergency scenarios where potentially the driver is not in control of the vehicle, and does the vehicle deviate off the road. So we're trying to keep the vehicle on the road because we know that's going to be a better outcome. But at the same time, there's, I guess, a whole range of situations that can unfold there. Autonomous emergency braking is one which has improved significantly or expanded significantly over the time that ANCAP's been looking at it. So it can be your car identifying another car in front of it. It can be a car identifying a pedestrian or a cyclist, or since 2023, we added a motorcyclist. So these are, scenarios where you want the vehicle to be able to identify and respond to another road user and avoid a crash if possible.
These systems are obviously introduced with the goal of safety. And if a driver's frustrated enough to try and turn them off every time they get into the car, that undermines the entire concept. So you've talked about striking a balance. How do you think we should be finding a happy medium between driver instinct and wanting to be in control, and also the systems that are going to help that driver stay safe?
So that's really, I think, where ANCAP's sitting at the moment. We are in a good position to help strike that balance. And I think the work that we've done over the last couple of years in terms of taking on board the consumer feedback and the concerns, feeding that back into the manufacturers, feeding that into our protocols to drive the changes, is really where that needs to sit. It's not really a role for government because the regulatory process is a lot slower. But I think, and we're seeing the technologies obviously evolve very, very quickly. But I think, these systems, it's really important for drivers to recognise that they're there for a reason. They are important safety features. We know they have demonstrable safety benefit. And we don't want to see people turn them off. So we're working to encourage manufacturers to do better so that they're supporting the driver, and you want to keep it on because it helps you. So that's where we're pushing, and we're trying to guide manufacturers now, given that some of their systems have clearly not been implemented as well as we would have liked, or as well as drivers would have expected.
You've spoken about these systems working together as really the modules that will help make cars more autonomous in the future. Do we see that as a realistic prospect for our roads in the next decade, that we're going to have more of cars that are basically combining these systems to drive themselves?
I think that's an absolute yes, because it's very clear there are a number of vehicles on the road that can already do this. So we see Tesla's full self-drive. There's numerous other examples, European cars, Chinese-made cars that have this technology, can already do this, or are already doing this in other markets. So in the Australian context, it's really about the regulations that sit over that, and when they're going to catch up, and how they're going to encourage, good performance and safety within that context, and who's responsible when something does happen. Is it the driver? Is it the manufacturer? Is it somebody else? So they're the, legislative questions that are being grappled with by the government at the moment. It is very, very complicated and very difficult. But, from our perspective, what ANCAP's role in this at the moment is ensuring that the systems are working the way we want them to. Their systems are delivering safety outcomes. They're performing well. They're performing well across a wide range of situations, so they're robust. They work in the day. They work in the night. They work when it's raining. That's what we want to see, and I think it's really crucial for that to occur. Otherwise, we're not going to have consumer confidence in those systems. And if we don't have consumer confidence in those systems, they're the systems that are going to be driving an autonomous vehicle. So that becomes a very clear safety concern and a trust concern. So it's something that is, it's what we're focusing a lot of time and attention on from where we sit at the moment.
Carla, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you for tuning in. If you liked this episode, let us know in the comments or share it with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe. We'll catch you in the next episode of RAC's Horizons podcast.